it's interesting that there are historians and artists and architects all in one room together at this conference in 1951. Now, do you think what the artists and architects were looking for in 1951 had any relation to what architects and builders were looking for in the medieval and Renaissance periods?
Uh, Actually, I think it was something very different. Uh, in the medieval period, maybe it was closer to us than the Renaissance. The Renaissance, in its effort to uh, revive antiquity, uh, went back to a system of fixed laws of proportion. That is, proportion for Palladio starts with a Vitruvian system that was laid out in the first century BC, and it became a dogma for the Renaissance, the idea of classical proportions. Uh, Now, in Witkover's exposition, he undertook to link it to musical proportions. But the way that was understood in the Renaissance also goes back to antiquity. There is a great difference in uh, the approach uh, to the classical tradition from what happened uh, later on in the 18th century when that all began to dissolve with a new uh, idea generated by uh, Burke and his contemporaries of uh, the sublime in the arts. That is to say, the thing that was fearsome and irrational. And this led to a rejection of classical certainty that never totally return. Uh, in other words, uh, the relationship of the arts to the tradition had been fixed, and individuals had no role in determining how it should be. And after the 18th century, uh, aesthetics was invented, and aesthetics uh, proposes that the individual response to what is seen and what is made in the arts, the individual becomes important, the feelings of an individual, and that makes it possible to break away from a fixed classical order and to create new orders. And there followed uh, a, a whole long period of individuality and improvisation in architecture and the visual arts, the Gothic revival being a particular example of this, that lasts all the way up to modernism.
So we've talked about two of the exponents, two of the leaders, that Witkover and Le Corbusier, and I'd like to come back to them. But there's one more figure who was important in sparking this interest in proportion, Colin Rowe. He first published The Mathematics of the Ideal Villa in 1947. Um, They say that in 1948 you couldn't go to, I think Peter Smithson said you couldn't go to a Palladian villa in 1948 without tripping over an architect. What would you say his role was in sparking this interest and continuing it through his long career?
Well, he had a great impact on architectural education. Everywhere in the country, his book was required reading, and the main essay in the book undertakes to demonstrate that Le Corbusier, in his villa designs, was coming to the same kind of conclusions as Palladio, and he related the two in a way that I don't think Le Corbusier would have liked, because, well, for one thing, Le Corbusier had to be the inventor of everything he did, and the conference in Milan was an opportunity for him to present his revised version of the modular, his proportional system. And that was what was important to him. And he gave it a Renaissance twist by using the human body as a paradigm for his proportions, but not the way Leonardo's Vitruvian Man did, but by a quite different system, where parts of the height of a man with a raised arm would be applied to a geometrical system. And so he welcomed the opportunity to join in this enterprise so that he could present the new modular. And of course, he was the focus of great attention. And it was a remarkable thing that he and Witkover got together. And also, this was an occasion of a very beautiful exhibition of books of the 15th and early 16th century relating to proportions that had been gathered by a Milanese publisher who was very wealthy and who acquired a extraordinary library of the original volumes, and then began to publish these volumes in her publishing business in very fine and editions with commentary from leading experts. And she had a great role in organizing the practical ends of the conference. And so the books and the conference itself were combined into a very important event. And it's extraordinary the number of people that were gathered who had been interested in the subject and went at it from very different points of view.
So we have Colin Rowe's article of 1947, Mathematics of the Ideal Villa. We have Le Corbusier's modular, the first version in 1948. Your article on the Cathedral of Milan, 1949, and Rudolf Witkover's Architectural Principles in 1949, which the parts of which had been published earlier. So all of these contributions are creating an intense moment here. Then in 1951, you wrote a review of Architectural Principles. Do you have any thoughts about that and how you might review that today as opposed to?
Well, I would certainly want to review it differently. I was a graduate student at the time, reviewing the book of the most influential architectural historian. So I behaved in a very proper academic manner, and it looks rather pompous to me today. But then, given my naivete, I don't think it was so bad. It's just that in subsequent years, I've changed my style a lot, and I give much more weight to a broad cultural and political and economic and social interpretation of the history of architecture.